All right, Nectar. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me on.
I think we should be completely honest with everyone and say that this is take two, because the first time we had some technical issues. You left my studio, and I don't know.
I think the recording was just so good. We're like, we need to do it again. It was just too good to be shared.
We need to take two, and then we'll edit the first time and the second time. It was way too good. I appreciate it though. So it's a little bit strange because we went over everything we want to talk about the first time around. So we're just gonna go over it again, I guess, or talk about different stuff. I don't know.
Mix it up for the second one.
Yeah, we'll mix it up. We'll get original. But thanks for coming on. I appreciate it, and I know that it's a lot of trouble. You're a very busy man, and I appreciate that you take the time again to come on and do this podcast. Which for me, of course, it's something new. So I'm not sure exactly I know 100% what I'm doing, but the interest is always there just to get interesting people that have a career or a life that is worth sharing and worth bringing value to the listeners.
Well, for sure, man. And I like the idea of a podcast. I mean, we got into this a little bit during the first episode, where like this nature of just democratically sharing, right, what the web allows you to do. And also given your background and the number of people that you know, like obviously well entitled the backstage, right? You've been in the backstage of a lot of these important meetings, important events, particularly in the Quebec landscape.
Yeah.
So why not go in the backstage and share some of these things?
Well, it's interesting because, over the course of, the last 11 years that I've been in politics, people were coming up to me all the time. They're like, okay, so how does this work? Oh my God, how does that decision? Oh my God, it's interesting. What's going on? And, of course, I mean, for us, it's just another day at the office, right? Just like for you, I'm going to start asking questions about high-tech companies. And for you, it's just, it's a game that you play, and for me, I have no clue. So it's kind of the same thing in politics. But we met with so many different people, and I thought, how interesting would it be for people to get a little glance of what goes on behind the cameras, right?
Yeah.
Behind the question period, or the stuff that everybody sees. And look, it's a beginning. Obviously, we have some incredible people lined up, and I'm excited. So here we are. We go back a long time, though. I mean, it's safe to. Let's full disclosure here. To the people listening, I mean, we go back a very long time.
Yeah, we could easily blackmail each other and destroy each other's careers if we wanted to.
Personally, I'm just waiting for you to be on the cover of, Forbes' New Billionaire, and then I'll start calling my lawyer that time with the medicine ball that you launched on my back.
How can I sue this guy?
Back in high school. High school, that was fun, and we spoke about it a little bit on the first show. And this is what sucks, because we got to go over the stuff that we spoke about, but it's okay. High school. I mean, we got to know each other back in high school. Tell me a little bit about your experiences.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about again, and high school is one of these love-hate relationships that I have. I love the fact that I developed a lot of and cultivated a lot of friendships that I have to this day, notably the person sitting right in front of me. So there's definitely a love component to it. The hate component is the uneasiness, kind of the teenage angst that I experienced, and you're kind of uncertain of yourself. So a lot in your head in high school. But it's also kind of going back to the love side. Well, you have these incredible moments and so much fun with people that you're around. So it's kind of like this extremes, right? It's kind of tough to describe.
It's the beginning of that stage where you start getting your independence a little bit, right? So I mean, there's no bus that picks you up in the morning to take you to school and to bring you back. So you have to leave the house. You have to actually go to the metro. You're kind of on your own, right? You're free to leave. Well, maybe not in Sec 1 or 2, but later on we were free to go out to have lunch. So I loved high school. But I remember the first days that we went there, I was frankly scared. We were going into this place, and first of all, it was a French school, but French from France, right? So everything is different. The accents are different, so I couldn't understand anything that was being said. The grading system, it was on 20. It was the European system, so that was different. And I remember the first maybe month or two, I was lost completely. And I remember the first day looking around thinking, I'm not sure this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm lost, right? I mean, we're a bunch of us from elementary school going into the same high school, but they kind of got regrouped all together, and I was sort of alone in one class. Then I'm looking around and I see this other person just doing the same, and I'm like, I think we're gonna be friends with that guy. He seems as lost as I am.
Yeah, being completely lost. Yeah, I could definitely relate to that. I remember I came from I think we both came from public elementaries, right? And we both grew up in a relatively rough, quote unquote, neighborhood of Parkex, and then we're in this private high school with like a very more prestigious high school or prestigious school. So yeah, first day was very disorienting. It was like I don't know anyone, literally by myself, and like sat down. I remember we just happened to sit behind each other and for like one back to back, and we'd turn around and it's like I'm looking for a friend. Because like the first thing I asked was like, can we hang out? Basically,
like out of those high school movies. Yeah. You want to be friends?
back in secondary one or sixième it was called, I think. In the
well, that's the other confusing thing because it went backwards, right? Yeah. So it wasn't secondary first or grade 7. It would go backwards.
Sixième, cinquième, quatrième.
Yeah,
right?
But sixième technically is grade 6. So they would go back because it's a high school with a CEGEP integrated in it. So if you count all the years, so it's 5 years of high school and then 2 years of CEGEP, so that's 7. So it would go down from sixième, cinquième, quatrième, troisième, seconde. So that's high school. And then première is 1 year before you graduate CEGEP. And then terminale was your last year of CEGEP, right? So they went backwards. So that was the other thing. We walk in the class, bienvenue en sixième, like welcome to grade to the 6th grade. And I was like, what? I just came from the 6th grade. What's going on here?
Yeah. Plus, all the students are a year younger than us, right? So we had a legit concern of like, it's called sixième and everyone's a year younger.
Because they also have an elementary school. So the kids over there just transition into the high school. And I don't know, for some reason, they pass a year. I don't know why everyone was a year younger. I have no idea. They look like children compared to us.
Yeah, which ended up being why we became the bullies of the school. So like our little crew, it's funny. I won't mention the person's name, but it's funny because I had a good time when we all had a good time. We were a bit of, let's say, we were a crew that were, to say eloquently, outspoken. And one person years later, this is as I'm dating Anna now, and one of her friends had gone to Stan. She was a year younger than us, and she's like, "You're dating who? You're with which person?" And then all these nastiness came out of because there was one person, I won't mention the person's name, but her name was very similar to a Greek swear word.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And then that person was not happy with us because we're obviously making fun of her name.
But it's funny because I don't even remember even looking or speaking to that girl ever. Yeah. So, and this is what's funny because a couple of weeks ago we were over at our friend Chris's house. You weren't there, but I was there, and we're talking with his wife Alex, and this whole bullying thing now is in, and it's a serious concern, obviously, for kids. I mean, I have kids now, and I'm constantly concerned about how they will be treated, but most importantly, how they will treat others, right? And we're having this conversation, and she's like, well, you guys were complete bullies in high school. And I looked at her, I'm like, but I don't think we were. Yeah. I mean, we never beat anybody up. We never pushed anyone around. I don't think we verbally abused anyone. It's just that, I don't know, we were tough, loud. I don't know what it was. I mean, people wanted to hang out with us and, and play around with us and everything. I don't remember one day getting into a fight, or I don't think so.
No. I think that
with respect to today's view of what bullying is, right? Where you have kids beaten up and shoved in lockers and tortured and, day to day.
Well, bullying has changed a lot. Also just because back then, even if there was, let's say, the physical violence, the threat ended at, the end of the school day.
Yeah.
Bullying today has become a 24/7.
With all the social media and stuff.
So this, the intimidation aspect happens throughout the entire day, which is, I think, much tougher if you're in of a certain age today and you're getting bullied, because it's not like, hey, you go home and at least you can forget about it till the next day. Now it's like people are attacking you online. Exactly.
Yeah. It has a bigger impact. But all that to say, I don't know. I mean, were we bullies? I mean, if anyone listens, I'm sorry. if you think I bullied you, I never thought we were bullies. I thought we were a very fun kind of gang to hang out with, and we had a lot of fun in high school. And if there's one place that I would go back to in a second, it'd probably be high school for me. Not even university, not even CEGEP. For me, it was just high school. It was that life. those 5 years. I don't know why. I don't know. It's that
Well,
whole
you're
growth.
also you're an athlete back then.
I was an
now.
athlete compared to now until you injured me with a medicine ball, and you put an end to my to what would have been a beautiful future career.
You
in
got me
sports.
back in that football game though. You crushed me in that pickup football game.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got me back.
Well, there you go. We're even. So I shouldn't sue you if you become a billionaire on the cover of Forbes or something. But I think we were together every single year. I think every single year.
I remember that. To be honest, it's been so long. Like I don't remember the system. Would you even switch, or would the classes even get mixed? I don't recall.
I think they would. I remember kids changing class from one year to the next, but for some reason, I think we were together in every single grade.
Yeah, I think the group stayed together for a large part.
Yeah, in most part they were. I think classes like English or stuff like that would switch up a little bit. I remember that one particular year where we were all together in English.
Oh yeah,
chaos. It was just not a good idea. And then that was it. College for me was I was a ghost in CEGEP. I mean, for me, I made a point not to go to the same school like any of our friends. Like I didn't come. You went to Vanier. Some other friends went to Dawson. I
went to Dawson.
Sorry, you went to Dawson. And I just told myself, look, if I go anywhere close to these people, I think I'd still be there now. So I went off by myself to some other school, and I was
Boulogne, right?
I went to Boulogne, and I was a complete ghost. I was like in and out.
Yeah.
I think I made 2 friends, which is okay.
Yeah. Well, for me, I felt that CEGEP for me was like a bit of rebellion. Like considering I was very studious in high school, got good grades, and really like dedicated myself. And then at Dawson, yes, there was there was still it's funny enough, I still got good grades, but the system, to be quite honest, was a lot easier.
Yeah.
So a lot of the curriculum, like it's stuff that we had already
covered. Was it because you were well
covered.
prepared from high school?
I think so, yeah. A lot of the stuff we covered, like especially things like history, was like basically, and I also took social sciences, right, which is not exactly a difficult thing in a public CEGEP. So yeah, like CEGEP is where I started drinking, smoking, going out. Like me and Chris would hang out and go like for beers at 8 a.m. and so it was a bit of a rebellion, and then it was a bit of a wake up call when I went to university after, because I was like, okay, now it's
the serious stuff.
Yeah, now it's more serious. So I can't coast as I coasted in Dawson.
Yeah, but it was still fun. So university comes around. You study commerce, finance, or business. And then I remember you telling me at some point, I'm going to do a master's degree in something that was completely like a foreign language, it felt like. And that's the first time that I was made aware of, this SEO, this search engine optimization, all this online marketing stuff. And, to be honest, I mean, we didn't grow up with computers or internet or stuff like that.
Well, we did a bit in high school, right? We had like a dial-up, like in Sec 3 or 4.
I didn't. No, I think I got my first computer in CEGEP.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And even then, I mean, it wasn't anything special.
Yeah, you had to wait like at least a minute for the nipple to show. And
no idea what you're talking about. But no, see, I remember games, you had to go on DOS, was it? And you had to put like codes or whatever.
So,
C/ whatever games, enter. So it wasn't big in my house, at least, and then I think more in university with all the papers and all that stuff, that's when I started using it more often. So you come along and you're like, oh yeah, so there's this program or there's these things that we can study patterns and different strategies to advertise online. And I'm like, whatever, Nectar, whatever. And today it's the biggest thing, at least, the way I see it. Everything is online. Everything is transferring to mobile. And here you come with all the knowledge.
Well, to be honest, it was a bit lucky in the sense of I was always curious. I studied marketing, by the way, so I was always curious about generally marketing in that field. And after university, I started like at the bottom ranks of this company. We worked together at a call center job when we were basically to pay our studies. Yeah. And then as soon as I graduated, I was looking for like, okay, I want a quote unquote real job now, right? So something in my field. So I took a pay cut to go work as a coordinator in this small engineering company. And they're like, all this new like digital stuff. They're like, hey, why don't you, you're young, you know how to use a computer. Why don't you figure it out? So I just started learning by doing, and then from there moved to another company, like an agency that was doing just that, because it was the part that I found to be the most interesting. Because back in the early 2000s, like 2003, 4, all the stuff was so brand new. So it was such a burgeoning field that no one knew what was going on. So you quickly felt a sense of competence. It's like, okay, I feel like I'm good here because no one else knows what's going on. To your point, it was so new at the time, and it was also evolving so rapidly that you also had to kind of like stay involved in it, you know? So it was a really exciting time where like you're figuring out as things go, like, you know, companies like Facebook didn't exist yet, YouTube didn't exist yet. So there's all these things.
So you were in it while it was actually happening, and you were learning as you go, kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
But it has evolved so quickly. Like in the last, let's say, 10 years, it has changed like leaps and bounds from what it used to be. I mean, what does that mean? Because you work a lot with companies now, and I want to talk. You know, we're going to talk a little bit later about what you do now with your company. But it's a huge challenge now for companies that are involved in this space where things consistently change. There's this exponential evolution. So, like, where do companies stand? I mean, like 10 years ago versus today. I mean, how do companies have to deal with these new changes and this new challenge?
Well, when I started out, it was a thing on the side, you know, like people were like, oh, okay, the internet thing's kind of happening, and then maybe we should invest a bit in figuring out. But now it's become a, how do you say the word in English, but incontournable, in the sense of like, you can't not have a digital quote unquote strategy.
It's indispensable.
Exactly, indispensable. So you need to understand these things at a deeper level than, hey, I need to build a website or social media. Now it's having an impact on how you think about strategy for your company, how you think about financing, how you think about marketing, hiring. It's really become the thing across really the entire spectrum of all your operations and across all companies, really. Even if you're like in fossil fuels and energies, like these things are starting to impact even very traditional industries. So it has become interesting to see it evolve, because it's like we're shifting from an old economy to a new type of economy. One that's not based on material goods, but one that's based on information and knowledge.
Yeah. How do you think that's going to impact, for example, the human resources, where the companies are going to obviously start investing much more in this sort of technology and in this sort of strategy, and they're going to probably transition their focus on an online presence or an online marketing strategy? Is that going to take away from companies' other resources, like we don't need salespeople anymore, for example, or we don't need business developers or whatever, because everything is transitioning online?
Well, it really depends, because even like tech companies need salespeople. So it's not. It really depends the context of the company itself to say salespeople are disappearing. I don't see that happening broadly speaking, but for certain types of companies, yes. Like if you're selling only online, if you're an e-commerce company, right? Where I think to your human resources question, it's really one about talent. And there is a limited number of people that have a deep understanding of how a lot of these technologies work, and the application of it from a business, more practical perspective. To make things a bit more complex is that the nature of these technologies continues to grow as it did 10 years ago. It's just growing now into different fields, right? So you started by saying, oh, this SEO thing and online marketing. That's just one aspect of many different elements now. So these technologies have moved beyond the digital screens, right, beyond the phones and the computers, are now starting to permeate a lot of the real world stuff that we see. So now it's like, okay, people that understand, let's say, software and transportation, right, an intersection of these two things, right, because like the kind of the classic analogy of transportation is going to be much more powered by software. We're seeing it with self-driving cars. It's going to impact it's already impacting things like ride sharing, right, where you can take your phone and call a car and it shows up magically at your house. So it's going to start continuing impact. So like you said, the human resources issue is not going away.
But you see, there has to be some industries that are going to take a hit. Like you mentioned the car sharing business, and we saw that here in Quebec, where Uber comes in and suddenly the taxi industry is up at arms. I know that very recently you were telling me about working with a huge newspaper here in Quebec, and they're having difficulty as well, but that's a completely different industry, right? It has a certain impact on your traditional, or maybe not traditional, but on certain industries.
Yeah, and it's that what's different this time. It's like if you look at, let's say, the technology industry, it's always been a dog eat dog world, like back to the IBM days and then Microsoft, etc., where in technology companies they're always very competitive amongst each other, just because of the nature of those cycles. But now what's happened is that that same sort of level of competition has moved beyond just purely the technology industry, and is now we saw the first examples or first casualties, if you want to call it, like so, the traditional media environment, right? So like TV, newspapers, radio, they're being impacted by it, and then we're also seeing it in retail, for instance, right? So like just shop on Amazon, it gets delivered to your door, right?
So how do companies like that evolve in this ecosystem?
It's a tough question to answer in a macro statement, right? So I provide some principles, but it's not every company that needs to adapt. It adapts at different levels, right? So if you're in retail, well, you need to completely change your game book, right? Like your game plan. If you're in traditional media, well, it's like if you haven't already changed, it's probably already too late, kind of thing. So it really depends on what cycle you are in this whole disruption that's occurring. But the few guiding principles that I can share for me, and that's what I think and I talk about, is this notion of agility, right? So being able to constantly adapt. So like it's, for me, the notion of talking about digital is like talking about electricity. It's like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, when electricity came and was first really popularized and commercialized, I should say, companies would hire vice presidents of electricity, right? If you go on LinkedIn today, you'll find vice presidents of digital, chief digital officers, and I say it as a joke. It's like these roles are obviously super important, but they will slowly fade over time. Like the whole digital thing will just be in the background. It's be like electricity, right? So that the notion of saying, oh, digital is important, it's like, well, yeah, so is electricity. So it's like it becomes by itself less important. What thus becomes important for me is this notion of moving faster, right? So the circadian rhythm of companies need to match the progress we're seeing on the technology side. So just like how software evolves and like your phone doesn't improve 5% every year, it improves like 100%, like that kind of progress, companies need to adjust the same way.
Do you think there's going to come a point where it's going to stabilize or plateau, or do you just think that from here on it's just going to skyrocket? I mean, we're going to be seeing things coming that are going to be blowing our minds like a year after year.
It really, generally speaking, is going to accelerate, but it really depends on what time horizon you're looking at, right? So like there's a famous Bill Gates quote is that people tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. Right.
Okay.
So, we've been talking about self-driving cars now for like close to 10 years almost, right? So like the first 10.
And they're still not perfect, right? I mean, it's not, they don't occupy all the space either. I mean, there's still
a ways to go, but if you look at enough of a time horizon over the next 10 to 15 years, like your kids are probably be illegal for them to drive.
Yeah.
That's my guess. Like it'll be like you can't get a license because like it's like getting a license to ride a horse on St. Catherine. It just like it does not make sense, right? So over a long enough time horizon, these things will be definitely be very impactful. But even in the short term, we're seeing a lot of progress. It just depends on what field you're looking at.
There's a certain aspect of all this that is scary a little bit, to be honest with you. Probably because it's unknown, and probably because we're living the change. Whereas you mentioned my kids, when they're 10 or 13 or 15 years of age, there's going to be so much stuff available to them that they'll have already. They'll be a product of this ecosystem, right? And it's kind of like us growing with Nintendo, and our parents are like, "What is this thing? You're pressing buttons, and the little guy jumps on TV," type of thing, right? So, and it's I don't know why, but for me, it's a bit scary to think that my daughters are just gonna walk in this car that's gonna open the door for them, and it's gonna, where would you like to go? And just drive off.
Yeah, I don't know if I think it's a natural human reaction to be afraid of these things because they're novelty and they're new and like how can they be used and there is good reason in some instances to be afraid. Like you look at the impact of social media, right? Like it's very not well understood right now the impact it's having in terms of just mental health generally, right? So a simple example is like, I know we both use Instagram, for instance. It's like if all day you're looking at like how beautiful people's lives are compared to yours, well, that that like it's the effect of it is going to be similar to what I feel is like smoking in essence, right? But on mental health, right? Because it's like your life can always be better. Because look at all these people. Oh, they're skiing in Whistler, and like, oh, look at what they're doing, and like they're so successful, they're so happy. But these are obviously very curated moments that are shared, right? So I think there is reasons to be afraid, but not for the popular stories of like the robot wars and like Terminator coming. But broadly speaking, I think it's time to be super excited and positive about the outcomes, right? For many different areas, right? Just health, for instance, right? So there's a lot of innovation happening right now on the health side. And that's going to have a huge impact on like longevity and understanding lifespan, things like understanding nutrition. For instance, agriculture is undergoing a huge revolution as well. So you might have heard about artificial technologies that enable, let's say, facial recognition, right? So being able to scan people's faces, but these same sort of like scary technologies are going to be applied to crops, right? So the yield on crops will be vastly improved, right? Because you're going to be able to identify, oh, this crop needs more pesticide, this crop needs more fertilizer, and doing this at scale with these technologies, right? Because the vision behind it, the computer will be able to understand and learn over time. So that's going to dramatically improve the output of things like agriculture, for instance, right? So take that one simple example, apply that to so many different areas, be it to like milk, vegetables, etc. You're going to see a lot of positive benefit of these things over the course of the next few decades, which I think is going to greatly impact humanity in a positive manner. But like you said, there's two sides to the story. It's not just all positive.
Sorry, I want to get to the business that you have and what you're doing, but before that, I have to talk about Google, probably because it's one of the biggest companies, and for you, it's probably not a big deal. But for me, it definitely was when I heard that, Google is coming to Montreal. They're investing. There's going to be a headquarters here. And then suddenly, you find out that one of the first hires in Quebec is your very good friend. How was that whole experience for you to know that, oh, look, okay, this is the next phase for me? I mean, in my professional career, Google is coming, and I'm part of it.
Well, it was obviously hugely rewarding. From a career perspective, it was definitely rocket fuel for my career. But like it was still a job. Like I find I got a lot of positive press out of it, and I'm not besmirching it. I think I'm still happy from that for sure. It was the first hire from a business development, from a sales perspective here in Montreal.
But that also helps too, right? I mean, when you're calling, all these top execs or these companies, and you want to approach them, you're like, "Hi, this is Nectar from Google. Let's set up a meeting and talk about strategy for your company." I think the door opens pretty quickly versus someone that calls from some other random company.
Well, I think it's fun because it's like I feel like it is definitely a meritocratic society where it's like you have this person that like most people can't pronounce my name.
Mine either, Quebec. By the way.
So they're like, what? They just hear the name. Okay, so we'll take a meeting. So for me, definitely helped me get more on the map.
Just call me Steve.
And it was hugely rewarding. It was like everything you hear about, the company itself and the press is kind of true. It's just like, it's almost like fantasy land in terms of a company, like free food, you have a gym, you have like all these amazing benefits, and the benefit of working with some really, really smart people. So you kind of feel honestly quite stupid in the company because it's like you have all these like geniuses walking around, particularly on the engineering side, where it's like these are the people creating the products that are used by billions of people across the world, and I'm like sitting next to them and like I'm like preparing a PowerPoint presentation and Excel sheets.
Yeah, but just as an environment that that's conducive to like your own growth, and I mean that's at the end of the day what matters most. I think to me, I mean you're there and you're learning from all these people and you're understanding much more. And the fact that, this is obviously a path that you see forming that is going to be definitely positive in your future career, right? I mean, you see this happening. You're living. You're like, okay, I'm at Google. I don't know what's going to happen, but, I'm here, and from here on, it's going to be good.
Well, yes and no. Like, I don't think I was looking at it from that lens, to be honest, because it's a quite competitive environment. You have to perform, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not like you still have to, your objectives to match. It's not like you hit the jackpot, Definitely it's positive for my career. I still benefit from it and I still learned a lot. And, but I don't think it's a touch point where you say, oh, okay, it's done. Like I made it, and like nowhere near that.
Well, quite evidently, I mean, you left and you started your own thing. But how much impact did working at Google have on you, kind of broadening your horizon and saying, okay, I got to go on my own now? I mean,
it wasn't, I think, a single moment in time in terms of decision for me. Like, I think it was been brewing for a long time. Like, maybe even from the early days of my dad, running his own fruit market, for instance, right? So, like, I had the example at home. It started a lot when I decided to invest in a few startups. So like I did some angel investing when I was there. And for me, it wasn't because I was like independently wealthy. It was more like, here's like a check and please, I hope it,
cross my fingers.
I still hope it works. Obviously not massive amounts, but it was still enough to like, to hurt the pocketbook and to be risky from a personal perspective. So I was able to invest in a few startups and like sit on the boards and like be involved in earlier stage of companies versus like Google at the time was like, it was like huge, 40, 50,000 people, right? So I'm sitting down now helping 5% companies and like helping them with how they think about, their strategy and their approach. And that kind of gave me the bug to like, you know what, I don't know what the next move would be, but I want to do something that resembles this. It seemed like being on the ground floor, and you've worked in a big company, right? So even if a good company like Google, which I think is the best big company in the world, is still a big company, right? So there's changes that happen now far removed from your reality, right? So you don't have your two hands on the wheel. You have a great environment, great approach, great learning, but when it comes to like things that really matter in terms of like the company's direction, like you're
nowhere near that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I wanted to have something. My next move wanted to be somewhere where it's like, okay, I want to be a bit more in control of my destiny, which led me to like say, okay, I want to resign and start something.
So let's talk about that. So you start your company. Tell me a little bit about it. This is it's not necessarily and specifically online marketing. This is from A to Z. You guys do strategic consulting for companies on how to build, how to administer, how to run, how to grow, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's actually we don't do any online marketing. I feel like my skill set in that domain is like kind of like eroded. Like I still know enough to be dangerous, but like you said, it evolves quickly. So I'm not the expert that I used to be, years ago. Now the reason I'll start with the what we do, but the reason what led me to the idea of PNR, what we do now was at Google. I was sitting down with like presidents and CMOs and talking about their approach to marketing. But I was like, but it's not just about investment on our platform. You have to think about maybe internalizing some competencies, your internal structure. I was trying to help them really from a consultative perspective, and I was always kind of looked at with a bit of like conflict of interest. Like, yeah, thanks, Nectar, but you want us to spend more on Google, which is the case. Yeah. But I really believe my recommendations made sense for them. So that gave me this embryo of an idea. It's like, the companies haven't yet fully understood the impact this is having, not just on their marketing, but really their entire strategy and how they approach going to market, thinking about their overall
basically surviving. In the long run,
surviving, growing, spreading to markets, all of the above, and the idea for that's okay. How do we help companies do that? So it's like we look at the market. Oh, there's this thing that exists. It's called management consulting, where you sit down with the boards of companies and CEOs, and you help them map out where they want to go, and you help them based on your expertise. And we're like, we want to do that, and that was the core embryo of the idea. And we've evolved a bit since then. It's still very similar to that vision, but now going back to what we were talking about in terms of moving faster, the way we approach it now is like we don't only talk about technologies and their importance. Obviously, all of our team comes from technology companies, but we approach it as to, okay, how do we actually help them execute on what they're working on? Because we think the biggest factor of success in an organization is planning well and then being able to adapt based on the plan that you made, right? So this notion of agility. So like, the whole notion of digital, like I said, it's fading to the background. So like I've removed the word digital from our website. I'm like, I don't want to see it. Like it's, if you don't think it's important, you're like, we're not going to help you. Like you're beyond like the kind of the. But
there's companies that still exist that they don't. Like the digital is out of the question, or
that don't prioritize it enough.
Really,
for sure, yeah. And I think that's a dangerous spot to be in for some companies. I think there's good reason because maybe not their industry hasn't been impacted as much. Like
what?
If you're in like forestry, for instance, right? Like if you're into lumber, it's like, I don't think pixels are going to hurt you, but you're probably looking at it. If you're not looking at it, for instance, from a manufacturing perspective, right? How these technologies, like I mentioned, the agriculture example, you need to be looking at it from a manufacturing perspective, very much so. So if you haven't, then yeah, it has impacted you. Maybe not from like a marketing perspective, but from a manufacturing perspective, definitely.
So right now, excuse me, are you looking mostly to new startups or new companies, and you want to get them started from ground up, or are you also working with the larger companies that want to kind of restructure and they want to kind of redirect their scope?
Yeah, it changed over time because like the lesson, it's our fifth year now that we're starting. Our first year, we're like, oh, you know what, we're gonna take it for the world, and we're gonna go knock on like Air Canada and like Bank of Montreal and like all these companies that we know that they need help because we just look at their websites. Like, they definitely don't prioritize it.
And also, a lot of these companies, you've probably worked with them in the past, or
well, that's it. We had a little bit of contacts, but then we realized, okay, we're three guys in a basement, and like we don't have a brand, and like we haven't done this before, so we don't have the track record of doing it. So our first customers were more early stage, more tech companies. But today we've evolved to work a lot more with much larger companies that are more in the veins of like some of the brands that I mentioned before that are looking for help at that transformative level. At really helping them navigate the waters of this technological disruption. And so our customer set today tends to be, I want to say, more mid-market firms. So usually with several 100,000 employees.
Is that the comfort zone for you, or do you still take on the smaller guys, or do you still maybe look at getting the bigger ones? Right
now, like our comfort is definitely bigger companies, just because it's been our backgrounds, our careers. We work with larger companies, and it's also where we have the biggest impact. Because you need to have several layers of management to hire a management consulting practice that makes sense for you. Because we come in again top level, and our recommendations can have even if it's like a 3% change of what you're doing, can have a massive impact. So, and earlier stage companies are less accustomed; they're also less mature to working with consulting firms. So we do from time to time, but more opportunistic, to be quite honest.
Has there been any time where you walk in and you have certain ideas, but then you realize that it's just not going to happen? I mean, you're either late in the game, or you can't really help the company evolve in this ecosystem.
Yeah, we're lucky that we get to choose our customers. Our customers choose us, but a lot of what we do is based on trust, right? We're not selling bus tickets online. We're not optimizing a checkout cart. Like in an e-commerce website. We're helping people solve really difficult strategic challenges with their companies, right? So to do that, you need to be able to engender a lot of trust very quickly, right? So a lot of what we do has to be super confidential, and because we're touching all the numbers of the company, we're touching the deepest challenges that they have, really looking at them like naked on the surgery table, right, on the operating table. To go back to your question, it really is one of deep trust that we need to work with customers. So if that's not there, then it's going to be harder to work with certain companies.
Yeah, but you select them. I mean, has there been moments where you look at a profile and you're like, there's no room for us over here?
It's one of those errors you make. You learn from experience. Sometimes you're a bit too greedy, let's say, and you want that contract. And you're like, oh, okay, but deep down you're like, I don't feel it. This customer, there's like a misfit of values. Like we don't value the same things. I think we've gotten better at sussing those out. After enough mistakes, you gotta learn that we have to work with companies where we just have a deeper value alignment. Because of, again, we're not selling commodity. We're not here to hey, we're gonna sell you a new software that's going to help you, and like the relationship aspect of it is actually quite important, because we're really going into the thick of things. We're like rolling up our sleeves and working with their customers hands on.
So how does it work? Like, give me the backstage. Like you or a client approaches you, or you approach a client. I mean, what's the procedure? What do you start with? And of course, I'm sure it changes depending on the company and the industry they're involved in. But what's the reflex? What reflexes do you have in terms of, okay, let me help you? Like, how does it work? What's the procedure?
Yeah, well, it depends on. We offer one or two main service offerings. One is mergers and acquisitions. So it's like either an investor is going to approach us and they're like, hey, we're looking to invest in a company. Can you help us like give a point of view on the company's technology, on what they're doing? Or a customer approaches us like, hey, we want to acquire, or we've been approached to be acquired. So helping them negotiate and front the whole deal. That's a smaller part of our business, and then the main part of our business is just corporate strategy. So it's like solving a a tough strategic challenge, right? So like you mentioned, a media customer that we had before, we helped them with like a reorganization of the company, right? Based on their technological platform. They hadn't evolved enough the org structure internally to reflect the new reality of they need to be more data driven, more driven on the digital platform. So we helped them draw the org chart of like, here's what it should look like. Here's the path. So you do this first, then step B, then step C. So it ends up being tough, very creative, strategic issues that we work on. One of our main offerings is something called strategic planning, which is sitting down with a customer, figuring out their current state, and then mapping out where they want to go. So like mapping out the desired future state of the company. And we do this using an agile process. Agile is kind of a buzzword you heard, oh, we need to be more agile, et cetera, et cetera. But it's actually a very specific method that's used in software. So every single software company in the world uses agile as a process to code, like to run the teams, basically. So if you're running a development team, you have software guys and girls, they're usually using agile. So what we've taken is that method, those principles, and applied them to strategic planning, which is like a once a year usual company retreat. What's different with our method is that it's one that's iterative, right? So going back to what we believe in that you have a plan, you execute it, but then you have to adjust the plan based on the reality on the ground. So that's what our agile method allows us to do, reiterate constantly.
So you stay on board with this company for a longer time, or you just go in a couple months, here's the strategy, ciao, bye, or do you stay on board, you follow up with them?
Yeah. We usually stay on board because that's the value what we bring is having operational experience, particularly when it comes to tech, where they're at least once a month with their customers, helping them map out their issues and help solve.
See, for me, this, I find this amazing because when you're thinking of these huge companies and these huge corporations, you know, one would imagine that they know what they're doing, right? That they have the staff and the people inside that know exactly how to direct this company, where we're going, how we're going to do it, what's the strategy. And I mean, maybe it's just me from the outside that doesn't know how things work, but it's amazing to me to think that I don't want to say they don't know what they're doing, but you know, they require on this sort of professional services to kind of guide them.
Consulting as a field has been around for a while.
Oh, for sure.
So it's like the need for higher companies. What bigger companies can afford is bringing in external points of view, and that's what we are. You know? External help that comes with our own expertise, and our expertise is this intersection of business and technology, right? So we're not there saying, "Hey, AI or virtual reality." We're there like, what's the business? What are you guys trying to do? What's the context? And then how can, if we look at that through a lens of technology, how can we change stuff? Broadly speaking, right? And that's a unique angle that not too many people have, we find in the market, right? Versus saying you need more data science and artificial intelligence. We're more like, what is the context of the business? What are they trying to achieve? And then what kind of tool can we use? Be it a technological tool, be it people tool, be it money tool. So that's how we tend to approach problems.
You mentioned AI and, you know, virtual reality, and, you know, these things are part of, I guess, the growth that we're experiencing, that we're living through right now. And it just seems to me that Montreal has become this huge hub in this high-tech space. Why do you think that is? Why is Montreal attracting all these professionals in all these industries?
That's a good question. Yeah, like, there's a few reasons. So when I started earlier in my career, there was no tech scene in Montreal. It was still very nascent. So a few things have happened. One is the development of technical talent from our 4 big universities here. Yeah. So engineering talent has attracted a lot of international companies. So Microsoft, Google, Facebook have opened up offices here. Also, we've had a lot of homegrown successes when it comes to technology companies, and more so. And that has attracted capital. So what's happened is there's been a lot more opportunity to get your company funded, right? So let's say me and you, we want to decide to open up a tech company tomorrow. We quit our jobs and like, let's do this. It's much easier to get some initial capital to fund our idea. So like, okay, we need to go and build this than it was 10 years ago. Okay. So that the nature of taking much more bets, much more at bats, has developed a much more vibrant ecosystem. And within that, you have a lot of sub-layer components. So like more entrepreneurs, more mentors, people that have had success exiting exited companies and are now reinvesting their own capital into these companies as well. So it's built a much more vibrant ecosystem that existed 10 years ago. And it's been great to see. And hats off to, like, I know some of the people that have been heavily involved in doing it. And I have to say hats off because I think the economic situation in Montreal would be very different if it wasn't for the tech ecosystem that we have. And then one final point on this, we do have a history also of gaming as well, which has played a part of it as well. So a lot of the technical talent was easily amenable also to be transferred outside of gaming. So I think it's a longer history of gaming in the city. So that's been another element.
It also feels like, because I follow a lot of quote unquote influencers, and it's become a scene where, and yourself as well included, where you give talks and you're invited, and it seems as though there's this culture where we want to teach and we want to show people how things are done, and we want to kind of inform them. I'm sure it's happening in other cities as well, but it just seems that every single week something is happening in Montreal where you can assist and hear someone like you, for example, talking on whatever topic or in any other business related field. There's a lot of information out there.
Yeah, and it continues to grow, and I see this as a positive thing. It's like it means that it's healthy.
Yeah,
it means that there's people that want to share. There's always meetups happening about people sharing best practices, the mistakes, the successes that they've had. So I see, again, I'm looking at it through my narrow lens of technology. I see it as a very positive thing.
You're often called to speaking engagements. What do you normally like? What do they want from you? What do you usually invited to speak about?
Well, a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about today. So it's like I don't tend to stray into areas I'm not super familiar with, right? Yeah. So a lot of the subjects that we're seeing, I tend to look at it more broadly, like from a broad strokes perspective. So technology's impact on society, technology's impact on how you run a company, for instance. So those are things, rather than focusing in on, let's say, specific shiny objects, like, hey, there's technology X is new and here's how you adjust to it. I used to do that, like when I was growing up in my field, like in online marketing, right? So like specializing in that. But I've moved beyond to more of a, I want to say, like kind of like a strategic lens on how I look at things.
I'm curious to know what kind of people attend these things. Are they more professional? Are they more students? Are they newcomers in the industry, or just who usually reaches out to you?
Well, it depends what talk I'm doing, because I speak at a few different conferences. Sometimes it's like professional associations. On the personal side, I'll also go speak at universities and also high schools. I do. I do part. I'm part of a program of the Montreal Chamber of Commerce called Visit Secondaire, and I go and speak once or twice a quarter to like high schools. And I have to say, it's like very different to speak to adults. Yeah. Talking to kids in Sec 3, I think it's great practice, but also because I want to go and contribute and give back to a certain extent. The speech there is less about the stuff I talk about. It's more about my career, what I've learned. And I also try and because these kids, like you said, they just grew up with phones, so that they didn't know the pre-internet world. So for them, I'm trying to educate them, like for instance, how much does it cost for you to use Facebook, right? It's like well, nothing, right? So if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So like I try and give them a lens of the opportunities they could take advantage of that they sometimes don't see. It's like, why don't you create your own YouTube channel, right? And start blogging and start doing stuff that they maybe take for granted. But it's also very tough to retain attention if you're in secondary 3.
Well, yeah.
It's so hard, man. It's like, and it's not like I'm not near that age anymore, So it's like I can't pretend to be the cool guy, and like it's very, very different, like getting called monsieur all the time.
But see, it's funny that even now, schools are getting involved in this whole change, right?
Oh, they have to, Education's being impacted so much right now. So it's like there's a legitimate question right now that's flung around. It's like, should you send your kids to university? Like, are those 4 years and X thousands of dollars worth the degree you get at the end? And honestly, it's a very good question, right? Because you can basically learn anything you want online today, right? Like you can almost become, I don't want to say like, I would say some hard sciences, like being a doctor, I think is still a good thing. I want my doctor to have a degree, but if you want to be a software engineer, you don't really need to have a degree. You can learn yourself.
And there's huge influencers online that are on that side. Like I listen to Gary Vaynerchuk a lot, and he's just against university. Don't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on your education. Go ahead and do it.
It's also different in the American system, right? Like the student debt is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And how much does it cost to go to university here, right? Like it's
No,
peanuts.
yeah.
So I think it's very different in the US, and I can't speak to the US that intelligently. Here, I still think there's a lot of good reason to go to university. I just think you can't neglect the hands-on practical experience. Right, like we kind of did it, but we're working at a call center job. But I think now, if you identify what you want to get into sooner, then do that. Like I think you could still benefit from a degree, especially the networks and contacts you'll get from it, and some of the theory and some of the backing. But I think you have to definitely focus as the first thing is, okay, how do I actually work in this to get practical experience?
How much impact do you think that's going to have on a work ethic? Right, I mean. Kids that grow up with all these tools and like you were mentioning, okay, create your own YouTube channel and maybe they'll succeed at it, maybe not, I don't know. But see, we grew up in an era where, like you said, it was manual labor. I worked as a waiter, I worked as a busboy. I did so many different jobs. And obviously from each job, there's something that you take away from it, right? Whether it's positive or negative, you develop human relations, social skills. Is there a danger right now, or is there a place where kids won't go through that stage? And
yeah, I don't see a danger in work ethic. I've seen too many, like I've worked with too many, let's say, younger millennials, quote unquote, that just have a ridiculous work ethic. So like I think they get slammed for that, but I haven't seen it personally. I know there's probably two sides to that. Where I see a bigger danger is in interpersonal skills and communications, because I see that at high school where it's like the kids are all looking at their phones, and it's a danger I actually raise. And I usually get a few points here. It's like, what's going to count more in terms of skill set moving forward, right? So if you have a very job that could be automated, it will be. Right. So if you're a truck driver, if you're a paralegal, if you're a radiologist, all these things are going away as disciplines, right? Because a software will do it better than a human. Yeah. It's guaranteed. Mm-hmm. So this core skill set that will not get automated away is going to be things like creativity, things like focus, things like communication, right? So those things continue and will gain more in importance over time. And that's where I see the impact of like things like cell phones and how we're addicted to them having a potential negative impact. Because instead of like, in high school, having a conversation with someone and speaking, like we had no other means except of yelling and screaming at each other. Yeah. Now you can just text all day long, right? Why pick up the phone and call someone? Yeah. And I see that if that's not properly identified and rectified, I think soon enough that could be a huge issue where kids don't have the influence skills that you need to work in a real world environment, right? Because the real world, you need to basically convince people of your ideas and what you're trying to do.
So you think that's going to have an impact in the marketplace, or
a negative one? Yeah. I think so, yeah. I can't quantify it. I haven't researched it, but I see it as a potential negative impact, yeah.
We're going to wrap it up. I know you're very busy. Tell me a little bit from the experiences that you have, from the industries that you've worked in. What's coming up next? What industries, for example, are in danger if they don't adapt? What industries will boom? With these new changes, what are we to expect, in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, if I was able to properly answer this accurately, I'd be a billionaire with a six pack, right? So I just
no, but I mean, you understand trends and you see things that personally I can't,
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we're saying. There isn't one particular industry that's not impacted or that's not seeing potential headwinds. I think what we're going to see in terms of we're going to see an acceleration of these things, right? So people have very high expectations. So for me, it all centers on the customer, right? So instead of saying, oh, this industry or that industry, I think you need to look at it the lens of what are people's expectations, right? And there is this fabulous quote in the last, Amazon letter to its shareholders that said, consumers are divinely discontent, that their expectations are always going up. And you kind of see this, right? It's like, if you've taken a flight recently and there's no Wi-Fi, you're kind of pissed, right? You're like, why can't I connect online? And the first time you took a plane with Wi-Fi, you're like, oh my God, I can actually go online. It's this transformative moment. And now a few years later, you're it's why can't I get this right now? Same thing with if you order Uber regularly, it's just normal that the thing just shows up at your door, right? Yeah. And you're you walk out without having to fumble a credit card. So the overall consumer experience is improving because of these technologies. So companies that don't have that as a core priority are really, really in danger. And where I see a lot of disconnect is going to happen is going to be, unfortunately, in the public sector, where the government hasn't adapted as much, right? So if you, it's funny, I was at the hospital this morning with my parents just for a simple checkup, and it's the process and like the technologies that they use, it's like, oh my God, like they're still stuck in like the 90s, right? And I don't see them at risk, but I see a huge dissonance in terms of what's possible today and why they haven't adapted. So, and I see that happening a lot in the public sector. So things like education we mentioned is one I'm particularly worried about because that's the next generation. Healthcare, I think the technologies will be there to help. Will the government adapt quickly enough? So that's where I see probably the issue, the most friction occurring. Personally, I think from the private side, it'll be the Schumpeter's theory, adapt or die, basically, right? So the creative destruction will continue. So companies that will be able to adjust, like let's say Walmart has the resources, they adapt really well to e-commerce. They kind of will probably survive that shift. But other companies, like we saw, like even quite a few famous Montreal retailers, not so much, unfortunately.
Yeah. Dude, I want to thank you for your time. I know you're busy. I'm going to let you get back to work. And we should do coffee soon, man, or dinner.
Absolutely.
I haven't seen your wife in forever, man. Thanks a lot, Nectar.